Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom in our continuing discussion of the French Revolution, right? Yes, with the French Revolution, of which we are now all up in the middle of, right? We are like all up in it. We talked about that in class today, right? That's right. We talked about that in class. G period and I talked about that in class. And also, this is a big to like Rhea and Graceland and Fairchild who are like, oh, you won't have the flip posted before 9 o'clock. It might not be 9 o'clock right now. But it's posted tonight, so take that, right? So, isn't that right, PP? Come here, buddy. Come here, you big fatty. So, yeah, exactly. And PP agrees that I did a good job, so everybody needs to leave me alone. So, the big thing about it, though, is we're going to pick right... Okay, thank you. I just ate. I know that you think that you can just look at my face. All right, anyway, now. See, he's not that small. He's, like, pretty big. Now, look, big thing about it, though, that we need to understand is we're going to pick up right where we left off in class, right? Talking about, of course, none other than the Women's March on Versailles, right? A very pivotal moment in the French Revolution, which is going to help define the course of actions and the course of events that are going to be going forward, right? The Women's March demonstrates us a lot of different things, and there's also major significance to this entire event as well. But the Women's March, though, we got cut off a little bit, kind of talking about what happened when they got there, right? So the women end up showing up out front of Versailles after they, of course, marched 13 miles in the rain, dragging cannons, bringing knives with them, and all this other stuff. They show up, and they're demanding one key thing. They're demanding bread, right? Which demonstrates to us, of course, the harsh times, the actual, harsh, situation of food resource and scarcity that's going on during the French Revolution. So, also, though, they, demand all the bread from it within the palace, and Louis actually has a pretty drastic take on this, right? He actually agrees to meet with a small delegation of those women, right? Agrees to meet with about 3 of them. Pierre agrees to meet with about 3 of the women that are actually, on their way to, or, now at Versailles, right? He meets with them, and then Pierre, for the very first time, he does something that you've never done in your entire life. He was charming, right? Apparently, Louis affected, this charming personality and stuff like that, and then it began to talk to the women, and they began demanding bread for their kids, and he was just like, oh, ladies, we can do whatever you need. We can, release all of the crates and the blah, and give you the bread. It's not a big deal. And apparently, one of the ladies was, so charmed by Louis that she, passed out and fainted on the floor. But the thing about it, though, is, I also think that maybe you walked 13 miles in the rain and drug cannons. You might have just been sleepy. So the big thing about it, though, is he releases all that bread. And about half of the crowd of women leaves, right? About half of the crowd of women goes back to Paris with the bread, ready to feed their kids and their families, right? But what, interestingly enough, happens is another half of them stay. And they're all furious and frustrated with the fact that they had to come out there in the first place. And now their aggression is beginning to turn onto a different figure, right? They're beginning to get very frustrated, very upset, very aggravated with Marie, right? Because you know what? She's a mama. She should have known better, right? She should have known better, Josie. She should have known. And so what they decide to do is they grab the gate to Versailles, the large golden gate out front of Versailles, and they start rocking it back and forth, eventually ripping it to the ground, storming into Versailles, where they actually meet 2 guards that are in their way. The 2 guards are like, stop, in the name of the and they just get tackled to the ground. The women stab him to death and use those filleting fish knives to cut their heads off, put them on sticks, and start trying to find Marie Antoinette inside the palace. They see her in the hallway. She runs. She's being chased down the hallway by these ladies who all just want some bread for the babies, PP. And so she ends up trying to get inside of Louis' bedroom. She knocks on the door. She's frantic. She's freaking out. And she's like, let us in, let us in, let us in. He doesn't answer it at first, which I think is grounds for divorce. Right? It's now, and then also, he eventually opens the door, right? He eventually opens the door, but bless you. He opens the door, though, and then he lets them in. And she says, you need to go out there, and you need to talk to them. You need to quell this violence, right? And what ends up happening is Louis is like, well, why don't you just go out there and talk to them? They're after you anyway. So he makes her go out onto a balcony in this giant foyer area within Versailles that, of course, some people in that room in your class have actually been to before. And she's standing above the women, and she brings her kids out there. And she's like, look, I have babies, too. Everybody, don't be mad at me. I have children just like you. And the women start loading their guns, right? They're like, I don't care what you got. And so, and they're about to, shoot her. And then at that point, the Marquis de Lafayette realizes in this moment, he's like, if I don't do something and intervene, she's going to die, right? So, and we're going to see this revolution go south real quick. So the Marquis de Lafayette walks up there, tells the ladies to be like, ladies, I am here. And all the women are like, what you got to say? Because, he actually apparently is very handsome and very charming. And he bent down, kissed Marie Antoinette on the hand, and said, God save the queen, right? And the women were like, all right. So, now, we'll let her live. But we demand that she return to Paris with us. And that is the biggest significance of this event, is the fact that the royal family was forced to return to Paris, right? Instead of actually ever living inside of Versailles ever again, the kings of France are now never going to live there. People say that the moment the royal family left Versailles is the day that it became a museum, right? Because literally no royals would ever live that far outside of Paris ever again. All the following royals that are actually going to come after Louis XVI are actually going to be forced to live in Paris, okay? So this is so significant because they're being forced to return to the city that is the beating heart of the revolution. And they actually paraded them all the way down there. Imagine a Mardi Gras parade, but instead of flambeau guys out front, it's people with heads on sticks. So like what ends up going down though, okay, is they all return to Paris, right? Now we're going to see some very, very important other things, all right, going down. Mainly, Pierre, in the financial sector of France, right? Because we have to understand one key thing here, Pierre. I love your attention right now, Pierre. I really love that you're zoned into what we're talking about, right? You have to understand, Pierre, that the financial situation of France was the biggest reason why the revolution broke out in the first place, right? Tax infrastructure, tax inequality, as well as a very rough economy and a very, very bad season of harvest and a lot of debt is going to lead France to demanding some different financial reforms, so which leads to the Estates General starting in the first place. No, you're going to listen to me talk about taxes. So like what ends up going down though is they literally were like, you know what, we never fixed that whole financial issue, right? So they decide to take it from the wealthiest estate, the clergy, right? And in a very, very important event in the revolution called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, which occurred in June of 1790, they're going to decide to take all that money away from the clergy. Right? Hey, be nice to your sister. So what's going to end up happening, though, is they actually decide to strip the land, wealth, tithe, and taxes away from the church, right? And this is a very aggressive move because for the very first time in European history, the Catholic Church is going to be mined and attacked, right? And so the National Assembly solves the immediate financial crisis by stripping away church lands, stripping away the tithe, like actually pillaging church artifacts from within some of these churches and actually giving over all of this like landed estates and all of this wealth to the National Assembly and to the to the National Assembly, to the legislative body, and back to the country itself, right? And also another interesting thing that's going to happen is that just like in the night of August the 4th, when they actually forced the nobles to swear allegiance to the new French government and feudalism would be abolished, this concept of the church existing outside of France and being something more dedicated to Italy and the Vatican is going to be kind of eradicated as well, right? And what's going to end up going down is they force the entirety of the clergy to take this thing called the Oath of Allegiance, right? And when they take the Oath of Allegiance, what's going to happen is you're going to have two new types of priests created, right? Ones who agree to take the oath and ones who don't. And this oath actually is supposed to outline an idea that the priests are supposed to be loyal to the French and the French people and the French state before they're ever loyal to the Vatican or Italy or the Pope ever again, right? They're saying basically that this is the state-sponsored Catholic Church now, and you are going to be allegiant to its people. You're going to stop stripping them of their tithe. You're going to stop taking their things. You're going to participate in the government just like everybody else, right? And when they have to be forced to take this oath, right, some decide to actually take the oath and some decide not to. The ones who refuse to take the oath are called refractory priests, right? R-E-F-R-A-C-T-O-R-Y. Refractory priests, right? Now, refractory priests immediately go to jail, right? They're going to be locked up during the revolution because they feel as though they can't be trusted, right? And now what's going to happen on the other side is the other group of priests that agree to take the oath, very famous people like Charles Talleyrand, for example, agree to take the oath. They're known as swearing priests, right? And when you think of swearing priests, my most fun way to remember it is just I want you to imagine Father Gregory like Father Edward, like getting up in front of mass and be like, all right, how is everybody, mother doing today? So yeah, because swearing priest just sounds like a priest dropping a bad word, right? So going into it though, you have to understand that that is what's going to happen here, right? The oath of allegiance is going to be very important, all right? And so it's going to actually set up this new kind of infrastructure for the Catholic Church, and they solve the immediate financial crisis by taking it from the wealthiest estate, right? So now the big thing about it though is from about 1790 to 1791, right? That year going forward, there's going to be some solidification of the government and a lot of things that are going to go on that you don't really need to know in a high school history course, right? You're going to see like the growth of publications, the growth of journalism. You're going to see the growth of the actual kind of civic pride and infrastructure of the National Guard begin to be expanded. And you're also going to see the solidification and the consolidation of the government, right? So the thing that we need to understand though as well is this entire time from about June of 1790 to the following July of 1791 and about that year, what you're going to see is the royal family was under house arrest, right? And the French want to keep the monarchy at this point. Now, where they are under house arrest is going to be kind of important, especially in a later event. So it makes sense you should probably write down the name of this palace now, right? And this palace at the time was called the Tuileries, right? Tuileries is spelled Tuilerries. I'll say it again. Tuilerries. The Tuileries, right? So like the Tuileries Palace, of course, it's as you can see right there, is actually taken in, that photograph was taken in black and white. It doesn't exist anymore. It actually got burned down. Now, the thing about it, though, is they were under house arrest at this venue. Now, they were allowed to kind of move around a little bit. They went to large ceremonies. They were allowed to go to this, like, chateau on the coast for, like, their summering and stuff like that. They were still allowed to move around. It wasn't, like, under house arrest, like, watched constantly, being abused, things like that, right? But what's going to end up happening, though, is the civil constitution of the clergy just kind of sits on Louis's stomach as a thing that he just seems to not be able to stand, right? It seems to be this thing that just kind of eats at him and eats at him and eats at him. He's like, I cannot believe I allowed myself to go against my God-given powers and then my God itself, and by going against the Catholic Church, I feel as though I'm failing, and if they can go after the Catholic Church, then what's to stop them from going after us, right? And so Louis, underneath the counsel of Marie Antoinette, and also this other guy who's going to be kind of important later on, not actually at all. He's not going to be important. I just like to talk about him because he's like a funny name, and he also might have been hooking up with Marie, like, for all we know. His name was Axel von Fersen, but it's all like now. And Axel von Fersen was an Austrian general who actually had planned a very important event. And what they decided to do was they were going to escape. Right? And they decided that they were going to try and escape to Austria in a very important event known as the Flight to Varennes, right? Now, in June of 1791, the royal family basically decides that they are going to abscond from France, and they're going to escape, right? Now, in the Flight to Varennes, there was a very, very kind of interesting little plan here, right? They were going to actually receive one of Marie's cousins, who was a royal in Russia at the time, and what they were going to do is tell her to basically bring a large contingent of servants with her. And then what would happen is a very, very simple, very good, cool idea, is they would leave in 2 carriages dressed as that cousin's servants, right? Like, of course, like Louis would leave dressed as a valet, like Marie would leave dressed as a governess. Like, some of the daughters would leave dressed as well. They also even put the little boy in a dress, and like the Dauphine of France was supposed to leave in a dress as well. So the thing about it, though, going into it, you have to understand that this art, like this not very like complex idea is going to go forward, but then due to a series of really terrible decisions, all right, things are going to go wrong, right? And now, really quickly, though, before we get into those terrible decisions, why do they want to go to Austria, right? What is the goal of getting to Austria, and why are they going to this place called Varennes, which is not actually necessarily even next to the border, right? So something that you have to understand is Varennes is about 120 miles outside of Paris, right? About 120 miles away, and so they're going to leave at night, right? When it's super dark and really quiet, and you got to remember, this is 1791 France, so there's not really a lot of street lights, and when the streets at night are very dark, so it would be the best time to go, right? They need to get to Varennes, though, and they want to get there before the sun comes up, so they don't get seen, so they don't get spotted, and then also because there is a military in Varennes, which apparently is still very allegiant to Louis, the monarchy, and also has agreed that if they can get there, they will shuttle them across the border into the Austrian Netherlands, where they will then be safe. And again, why do they want to get to Austria? Because Marie's brother, Leopold, is the king of Austria, right? And so if they can get to Austria, the royal family will be safe, and there's a possibility that maybe they'll even raise an army, go back and try to reinstall themselves in France, right? Well, the thing about it, though, is things begin to go wrong, right? Due to a lot of different reasons that we'll talk about in class, right? The Marquis de Lafayette does a surprise inspection. Louis the XVI, of course, writes a letter that he's saying, like, where they're going, like an idiot. Like, instead of taking 2 carriages, Louis makes a last-minute decision to take 1 carriage, which was way too big and way too slow. One of the wheels falls off the carriage while they're outside of Paris trying to get out of there. Marie Antoinette gets lost in the alleyways of Paris for like an hour. Like, there's like all these different reasons why it ends up failing, but what ends up going down right before they get to Varennes, only a couple of miles outside of Varennes, the flight fails and the family is captured, right? They are arrested and they are drugged back to Paris. Now, the thing that's really important about this moment is that now, again, what did I say was happening from June of 1790 to June of 1791 in that year following the civil constitution of the clergy? One of the biggest things is the expanse of publications and the expansion of journalism, right? The expansion of journalism is going to begin to carry word of the revolutionary fervor to more people a lot faster. So once they get captured and they get arrested and then brought back to Paris in an attempted escape, the journalists and the newspaper writers are going to start slandering their name in the paper as aggressively as possible. This failure and the subsequent news articles that follow destroys any remaining popularity that the royals had whatsoever, right? And they were basically reduced to prisoners of the state. And what's going to end up happening is they get returned to Paris, and they're almost killed when they actually come back. People are throwing rocks at the carriages. They're freaking out. They're demanding an end to the monarchy. They're flipping out as in, like, we wanted to see the downfall of the royals. We refused this, blah, 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 blah. And what you're going to see happen, though, is a lot of people are going to be pro-monarchy, and a lot of people are going to be anti-monarchical, right? Now, in this moment, when they return back to, like, Varennes, there's also some organization going on. right? You're going to see the growth of these different revolutionary groups, right? Now, these revolutionary groups are actually kind of always been around, but they're now going to begin to like solidify themselves together. And one of the most important ones that we're going to talk about, not only in this unit, but also in that little baby unit that we're going to have going into your exam, is a very important group of people known as the Sans Kos, right? The Sans Kos, or the rise of the Sans Kos, is very, very important to understanding the people that are in charge of the violence of the revolution, right? At the beginning of the revolution, you have to understand that the bourgeois, right, the bourgeoisie, were the leading group, right? You got your Marquis de Lafayette, who's a noble, he's not a bourgeoisie. But like you got people like these other individuals like Mirabeau, who's also a noble, not a bourgeoisie. But we're not getting into that right now. So basically, nobles loyal to the government as well as the bourgeois were leading the entirety of the revolution. Now, the thing about it, though, is they weren't the ones out in the streets burning stuff down. They weren't the ones, like, destroying the Bastille. They weren't the ones, like, freaking out in these riots. They were this other group of people that a lot of people called the mob of Paris, who did a lot of their dirty work for them. If you need that Bastille stormed, those are the guys who are going to go do it for you. If you need somebody to get crushed by a drawbridge out front of the Bastille, these guys are going to be the ones to go and do it for you, right? The thing about it, though, is after the failed flight, the mob of Paris demands more violence and more immediate action, right? And so they begin to take on a new organization, and they start being called by a new name, right? People start referring to the mob of Paris as these things known as the Sans Kos, which are basically the organized mob members themselves. Now, fun fact, when we're actually looking at the Sans Kos, where their name comes from and what it means, it's all important to understanding the progression of the revolution. Sans Kos means without pants, right? So basically, this entire group means without pants, right? Like now, which is hilarious, right? Now, interesting little thing, though, about it is that they weren't running around like Winnie the Pooh, rocking just a shirt. That would be the most terrifying army that the world had ever seen, right? A bunch of grown men running around in just a t-shirt. Nobody wants to see that. So now, look, biggest thing about it, though, is they actually did have pants on, as you can see, right? Some of you are like, well, wait a minute, Terry, these look like pants to me. Well, the thing about it is more along the lines of what culottes really means in French, which is breeches, right? Breeches were very, very expensive. They were bourgeois and noble pants, right? The ones that had been tailored to fit their legs and look almost more like leggings than they do like pants, right? Instead, the Sans Kos members didn't wear pants like that. They wore loose-fitting working men's trousers, right? They wore like loose-fitting trousers, okay? And so the thing about it, though, is this signified their working aspect and the fact that they were among the poorer communities of Paris, right? And so what's going to happen, though, is they begin to organize themselves into a mob. They're going to become the radical revolutionary citizens who love violence and simple solutions. There are two things, y'all, two things that Sans Kos members want, and it's blood and bread, right? Like those are the two things they want. Now, I don't need a cup of blood. I mean, they want blood as in they want the punishment to actually happen to the people that they feel are the ones who made them poor. And they want bread because they want immediate action in food intervention and or monetary intervention as well. So going into it, though, you're also going to see, though, in direct conjunction with the Sans Kos, right, you're going to see the rise of these things called the clubs. Now, the thing about it is the clubs have been in the background the whole time, right? The clubs have been a big thing ever since the revolution began in 1789. We just haven't talked about them yet, right? The clubs, though, of course, the ones that I'm talking about, are not this kind of club. Not the kind of club that you walk into and it's going like this. Not that kind of club, right? Not that kind of club at all. I'm talking instead about these kind of clubs, right? Large political organization clubs where guys would get together and discuss, yell, freak out, and have big speeches and debates on how the progression should actually go. The way that you should think about the clubs is a little bit more like political parties, right? And the two most powerful ones that you need to know are the Jacobins and the Geon Dins, right? The Jacobins are the radical, violent, and aggressive ones who love to use the Sans Kos like their little army, and they want to see the end of the monarchy. They want to go full-blown republic, and they want to see some people get executed and punished for the things that they have done. Some of the most famous Jacobin members are going to include people like this guy named Maxilon Robespierre, right? So these guys right here are your three biggest Jacobin leaders, right? And they're going to be super important as we progress through the rest of the revolution. You've got none other than Jean-Paul Marat right there, that sewer journalist that we've already talked about. Then you got this dude over here who's a former lawyer during the French Revolution. His name is Georges Danton, right? You can write it as George, right? Georges, right? But Georges Danton, former lawyer and an aggressive member that was very, very powerful during the revolution itself. Give me 1 second. I got to let a puppy outside. All right, so now look. Sorry about that. We had to let the dogs out back, right? But George Danton is going to be extremely important as a leader of the Jacobin Club and somebody who begins to call for that violence as well, right? He's a great orator and a fantastic political maneuverer, but then we have somebody else that's wildly important, and his name is none other than this guy right here, Maximilien Robespierre, right? Now, Robespierre, much like Pierre, the little baby that I just let outside, is going to be a very malicious figure, right? When you think of aggressive people from history, the Hitlers, the Stalins, the Mussolinis, Robespierre, not that far off, right? Now, he didn't start out that way, though, okay? Maximilien Robespierre is very important because he actually entered into the Estates General, was one of the elected officials, an avid bourgeois and third estate member, right? But what he begins to demand is an end to the monarchy and a full-blown republic, right? He wants to go true, all-out Jean-Jacques Rousseau, general will, aggressive republic, right? And Maximilien Robespierre is so famous that he even gets joked about in the show New Girl. Check this out.
Easy with the knife, Robespierre.
Exactly, right? So now, that's Schmidt talking about Maximilien Robespierre, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is, well, on the opposite side of the Jacobins, you have the Geon Dins, right? And the Geon Dins are the moderate ones who resist the violence and want to politically bring an end, a peaceful end to the revolution. They're your more moderate people. And whenever I'm talking about these clubs, I always like to reference them as like cartoon characters. When you think about two cartoon characters that define who these people are, the Jacobins are much like the Jerrys from Tom and Jerry, because they literally try to kill that cat like most episodes. And then the Girondins are the Garys, the simple, the kind, the meows of the world, right? But we'll talk about all that stuff a little bit more when I see y'all in class on Friday. Y'all have a good one.